They say truth is stranger than fiction. Well, is it? We have stories to tell that are certainly strange, and evidence compelling enough to make even the most skeptical wonder. The people who claim to have undergone these experiences are certainly convinced. We've reconstructed what they describe so that you can see what they saw and decide for yourself. Later, we shall hear a family tell how a poltergeist turned their lives upside down. First, is there a way that human beings can sense impending tragedy? Some of the worst disasters in history have been foretold by those who claim to have premonitions. Who would have imagined that the Titanic, the ship that couldn't sink, would do just that on her maiden voyage in 1912? Well, 14 years before, this book came out. It told of the largest ship afloat, rich and famous passengers, a collision with an iceberg, a sinking, and not enough lifeboats. The ship was called the Titan. But if premonitions are so accurate, can nothing be done to stop them becoming reality? Every night, Chris Robinson, an engineer from Bedfordshire, dreams complex, disturbing images. Dreams that apparently come true, and they've been so accurate that the authorities listen to his warnings.
He is designated a contact, and then really we act as a filter to see what he is saying and try and make something of it.
If I'm crazy, they're crazy too, and they're not crazy, so this is really happening.
Chris Robinson makes notes of his dreams. The images at first are meaningless, but when he decodes them, they seem to predict dramatic events.
Dogs mean terrorists. Fish mean terrorists about to be caught. Snow means that the situation that I'm looking at is imminent and it's dangerous.
Chris saw danger when he had a series of dreams about a Royal Air Force base, Stanmore Park in Middlesex.
I saw dogs in a graveyard, and I knew that dogs meant terrorists. I saw clocks ticking. There was photographic equipment. There were all these strange symbols.
Chris couldn't work out what the photographic equipment meant, but put together the other symbols predicted that terrorists were going to attack the airbase. The logbook there records how Chris phoned the guardroom to warn them of his premonition.
They didn't really know what to say to me on the telephone, so I then decided that I wasn't going to mess about anymore. I was going to drive down there and present myself at the main gate. Can't really explain what it feels like to know that something is going to happen that you can't possibly really know in advance.
Hello, sir.
Hello, my name's Chris Robinson. Look,
yes, sir.
I phoned up a couple of times. I want to
frightened,
speak to someone.
I was nervous, but on the other hand, I knew that if I didn't go there and warn them, there could be a lot of people killed.
In the guardroom, Chris Robinson was interviewed by the duty sergeant, Brian Earle.
You have to be very careful when this situation arises, because there's hoax bomb calls and such like. And the individual could have been a total madman for all we were concerned.
It's always RAF Stanmore when I'm going past. Then I see
The RAF police were naturally suspicious. Who was this man, and why was he making these claims?
But there's a couple of planes on the ground, static on the ground.
Contacted the Chief Inspector at Bedfordshire Police to see if they knew of Chris, and in actual fact they confirmed that he had assisted him through his dreams. But as a precaution, we did see to double the guard for a week after his actual visit.
Just over a month after Chris Robinson first dreamt about the base, this was the news.
2 people are being questioned by police after a bomb went off at an RAF administration depot at Stanmore in northwest London.
I initially felt shock and horror, but after I heard that nobody had been hurt, I felt absolutely delighted because I had been proved right again.
There's speculation this morning that the bombers may have entered the base at the back, where the perimeter fence adjoins a churchyard.
I'd had the dogs, that meant the terrorists. I'd had the clocks ticking, that meant the bombs. But I'd also had this photographic equipment. And it wasn't until after the explosion that I learnt that the building that was destroyed was a store where the RAF kept their photographic equipment.
But was it really such a surprise? Terrorists had attacked 4 military targets in just over a month. Chris Robinson's premonition about Stanmore Park could have been just a lucky guess, or coincidence.
What about this vehicle, Mr. Robinson? What about this yellow and green vehicle?
It could be just 1 in a billion chances. For instance, plane crashes. Statistics show that there's 1 major plane crash in the world somewhere every 2 weeks. Coincidence can indeed explain away many cases. To me, I think that Chris Robinson's results are beyond coincidence. He's certainly come up with many interesting cases of things that are most unlikely to occur. And these interest me because they're not trivial things.
Dan Eldon was only 22, but already a brilliant news photographer. He'd grown up in Africa. Covering the war in Somalia, he was taking pictures of an attack by American helicopter gunships when a Somali mob turned on him and killed him. What wasn't known at the time of his death was that a few weeks earlier, Dan's mother, Kathy, had been warned by Chris Robinson that her son was in grave danger.
Chris was very concerned and came over to my house with a dream that he had had about a swarm of bees around my family.
She then told me that her son was in Africa, and I said to Kathy, I feel that the problem could be him, so please tell him to be careful.
Up to that point, no journalists had been killed. And I believe that Dan, with his streetwise aspect in Africa and the fact that he was friends with so many people, that he would somehow make it through.
The images Chris Robinson saw made his fears for the young photographer grow. But he couldn't see enough to prevent what was about to happen.
Chris talked with a close friend of mine on the weekend before Dan was killed. He had a number of images that he couldn't make sense of. 4 dead photographers, in Seaside Place, salt water will damage the lens, F4, rescue me, Kathy. Afterwards, it just makes so much sense. It's frightening. Talking about cameras, telescopic lenses, 4 dead photographers, there were indeed 4 who were killed. Salt water affecting the lens. They were in Mogadishu, which is a seaside town, and Dan, the day before he was killed, was photographing women Marines in bikinis on the beach in Mogadishu. The F4 is the kind of lens that Dan was using. Rescue me, and Kathy. That all makes sense to me.
Some would say Chris Robinson's dreams make sense only with hindsight, but the premonition of Dan Eldon's death turned out to be uncannily accurate. Chris didn't need hindsight for his next premonition. He was so sure it would happen, he was there when it did.
I'd had a series of dreams about an airfield, and I wondered why this was, because I had no plans to visit an airbase or anything. And in the dreams there was rockets, there was aeroplanes, there was explosions in the sky.
What did it all mean this time? Chris called his contact at Bedfordshire Police.
He then described seeing these rockets going up in the sky and then colliding, and these crowns coming down.
In Chris's next dream, the crowns became parachutes. Suddenly, he knew what was about to happen.
All these dreams made me realise that there was going to be a plane crash.
But where and when? The following morning, he phoned a friend, national newspaper astrologer Penny Thornton. He'd just heard about an event taking place that day.
Chris was very enthusiastic about going to an air show, simply because it somehow confirmed or affirmed to him the imagery of 2 planes crashing and fireworks and the parachutes descending, which he'd had in his dream.
I decided to go. I had to go, really. There was nothing else you could do. I mean, I'd seen it all happen in advance, and I had to go there and know whether it was going to be real.
Chris immediately set off for Fairford in Gloucestershire, and the world's largest military aviation display, the International Air Tattoo. One of his premonitions was about to become reality in front of his own eyes.
I was absolutely convinced that this was going to happen. I wasn't sad or upset because I knew that the pilots of the planes came down safely on their parachutes. The people that were with me said, "My God, you know, nobody can survive that." And I said, "Oh, no, don't worry. In my dream, they come out on their parachutes, there's no problem."
Two Russian fighter planes collided today above tens of thousands of people at an international air show in Gloucestershire. Both pilots ejected and were only slightly injured.
I was at the right place at the right time, but how did I know in advance? The pilots didn't.
Those who've heard Chris Robinson's premonitions are ready to believe that he can foretell the future. Tragically, the clues to photographer Dan Eldon's death didn't add up in time. But since then, Chris has been able to help Dan's mother in another way. Kathy Eldon is a former journalist herself and wary of believing what she knows she wants to believe. But she's been astonished by the messages Chris has relayed through his dreams, messages only her son could have sent.
He said he wanted money raised for the charity which was going to be named after him. He talked about film in his camera, where to find negatives that we had lost. There was just this sense of tremendous life and joy that radiated out of this character, and it made us all very happy to think that he was still around in such a positive way.
After Dan Eldon's death, those remarkable pictures were gathered together and published as a tribute. And proceeds from the book go to the charity which his mother, Kathy, did set up in his memory. Probably more reported sightings of ghosts in the British Isles than anywhere else in the world. According to those who claim to have seen them, they come in all shapes and sizes. Most of them haunt old buildings, repeating the same action over and over again, trapped in time and oblivious to what surrounds them now. Poltergeists are something else. They haunt people. The word poltergeist means noisy spirit, and they make their presence felt. Behind a street in Cardiff, down an alley, the quiet life was about to be shattered.
We started in this building about 15 years ago, repairing all sorts of grass cutting equipment, and later on we started to sell mowers.
John and Pat Matthews, helped by Pat's brother Fred, ran a thriving business here. No real worries, just ordinary, everyday irritations.
Two fellows hanging off of him.
And steam coming out of his ears. You know, that must have been one of the closest matches I've ever seen. It's those blasted kids throwing stones. I'll go see to them.
Tell them I'll throw them on the roof if they do it again.
John went to catch the young vandals red-handed. But there weren't any vandals. The stones seemed to be coming from nowhere.
Pathetic, John. Haven't you got any control over them?
There's nobody out there.
Pull the other one. Come out of thin air, did they?
Baffled. We were baffled that there weren't any kids around here and nobody that could throw stones. We just couldn't understand it. We just couldn't understand where they were coming from.
I thought he was a nutter, to be honest. I thought he was mad. I thought people throwing stones, it's got to be. Can't be anything else.
And I started to get worried that there was something strange here in this building.
Whatever it was about to move in at Mower Services.
I would see little things flying across the room.
Used to just throw stones and things like ball bearings.
Then suddenly, in this one corner of the shop, it got ice cold. And then there's a terrible smell of burning.
Somebody, or something, seemed to be playing childish tricks, like hiding keys.
We searched high and low for these keys. It went on for 5-10 minutes or so. Then all of a sudden these keys came shooting across the floor.
Then money began appearing.
Every morning it got in turns, we were having it in turns. Each had a £5 or £10 note and then stuck in the ceiling tile.
Unable to believe that one of them wasn't responsible, the family set up a test.
They said, close the doors, both sides, and we'll see what's happening.
Right, come on then. We're going to settle this once and for all. Hands on the bench. Fingers touching. Right. Come on then. Throw us a stone.
There was no chance of anybody being in that shop except us three.
Hang on. If we're going to do this as a proper test, well, I think we should be writing everything down.
With that, a pen dropped, and then I started saying things like engine parts.
What about a plug?
We knew then that it wasn't one of us. We were looking at each other, our hands were still on the bench.
We were there 2 hours, and I went home and told my wife I just spent the most fascinating couple of hours in my life. I couldn't believe it. We were never really afraid of it. It became part of the family.
We decided that we'd name him, and we called him Pete the Poltergeist.
A poltergeist called Pete? Could there be such a thing? And why was it favouring Moa Services with its attentions? The family needed expert help. They called in David Fontana, a university professor with an interest in the paranormal.
Most of my visits were unannounced, so they didn't know that I was coming at any particular time.
With the element of surprise, the professor would surely get to the bottom of what was really happening.
As I entered the workshop, at that very moment, a stone was thrown across the room and bounced off a piece of machinery. John was sitting there talking to one of the sales representatives, but there was no question that either of them was involved in this. And John looked up at me and said, "There, see what I mean? He's greeting you." I think I was very pleased, actually, because it's so rare for an investigator to be there when things actually happen. That made me take things very much more seriously than perhaps I otherwise would.
Professor Fontana was so convinced that he filed reports on what he called the responsive poltergeist. He said it possessed both intent and the rudimentary intelligence necessary to accomplish this intent. And he drew diagrams showing how, when objects were thrown into a corner he called the focus of activity, some force catapulted them back.
You don't see the things in midair. You hear them hit the wall and clatter to the ground, you look round and the stone is there, but you don't actually see it in flight. Which, in a sense, rather strengthens the idea that nobody's playing tricks, because if they were, you would see the thing in flight.
With Professor Fontana's reports, the case began to attract attention across Wales.
I wouldn't like people, you know, to get the wrong idea, and we were afraid if we started advertising about it, you know, we would frighten customers away.
But the customers kept coming, and so many people were eyewitnesses that this became one of the biggest poltergeist cases ever.
I was just as sceptical as everybody else. I'd heard all about this poltergeist, but I was in the shop one day and little nuts and boats sort of were just flying around, dropping from nowhere. It was quite incredible and quite scary.
After thieves broke into Moa Services one night, the insurance assessor who came witnessed it too.
When I was there, I heard the stones or noises coming from the back of the shop. When I asked them what it was about, I was told, "Oh, that's Pete the Poltergeist." I didn't really believe him. So I opened the door and looked through, and I could see a stone whizzing around on the floor. There was nobody else out there.
When Gareth Lucas went back to the office and told his story, the other insurance staff, not surprisingly, laughed, until a colleague went, and the same happened to him.
Quite to my amazement, small stones and things were flying around and pinging off shelves, and I was able then to go back to the office and confirm his story.
Even the Baptist Church, one of two chapels either side of Moa Services, began to experience poltergeist phenomena.
Before I knew anyone else had problems, one evening I was working up here in the office and stones started hitting the window. I did everything I could to find out what it was. There were no people down there. I went down and looked around. There was nobody there that could throw stones. When I came back upstairs, the whole business continued.
But the minister believes he has an explanation.
As a Christian, I believe we live in a visible and seen world which has a supernatural dimension wrapped around it.
So what might that supernatural dimension be? Maurice Gross is a leading poltergeist expert. He's been investigating cases for 17 years.
There are two main theories of poltergeist phenomena. One is that some people have the ability to exteriorise a force which affects their physical surroundings without physical means. And the second theory is interference by outside entities. Now, we don't know what these entities are, but sometimes they appear to be spirits of dead people.
Nobody knew what the mower services poltergeist might be until one day Fred says he saw it.
We were fixing this mower on the floor, and I looked up, and there was a tiny boy.
John, don't do anything too violent.
What are you talking about? I'll have to be violent to get this thing off.
No, I don't mean that. Now, do as I say. Don't turn around quickly, but look up gently at the shelf behind you, okay?
What are you talking about?
He was up there, on the shelf. A little boy. It must be Pete.
Half a house brick came hurtling down, and we both panicked with amazement. As you can imagine, he was all grey. No face, but the face was there. It's hard to explain. And all you could see was his hand waving.
From then on, the poltergeist never left Fred alone. Last year, mower services outgrew its old premises and moved to a new industrial estate. Pete the poltergeist didn't follow. He moved in with Fred instead.
And there's countless things that happened at home. Pictures turning in the frames, spoons being thrown up the stairs, pound coins. Oh, it's amazing.
Fred Cook and his wife have moved home to escape their unwanted guest. They took the precaution of breaking a piece of pottery which had kept appearing and disappearing. So far, there's been no sign of anything happening again. And those are our stories tonight. Strange, I'm sure you'll agree, but true. Until next week, good night.